All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's the No Name Cinema Society Indie Spotlight, our second portion of our evening-long discussion of films. We start with a current feature, then we do an indie spotlight, and then a classic. So we're in part 2 tonight, and this is our indie spotlight tonight. I'm Jonathan Betzler, one of your very handsome hosts here for the No Name Cinema Society. And with me today, well, first let me tell you that since it's now 2016, each week we've been talking about indie films from 5 years ago. We've been doing 2010 indies for a while now, but now we did our first 2016 feature with the current wave. It's time to do 2011 indies. And with me today is, in Charlotte, North Carolina, Dave Joseph. How you doing, David?
Doing well. I almost forgot to put up the nameplate there. It was
just in time.
Pretty close.
Pretty time. I was stalling there for you too.
I did notice. Thank you. I appreciate that.
And our other extremely handsome young man in Brooklyn, New York. Yeah, he's around there somewhere.
I'm looking around. I don't see him. I don't know where he is.
Let's just go with J Money.
J Money, you didn't. You forgot to change something, I think.
Did I? I might have used an old title. I can't see it, so I'm gonna.
No, that's not what I meant. Not anything in front of you.
I'm
assuming that something needs to be changed. But anyway, that's an assumption on my part.
Yeah, that's interesting. You assume that one way or the other.
I'm taking a chance for sure. The audience has no idea what I'm talking about.
That candle is completely inappropriate for the film we're about to discuss.
That's absolutely true. I really have the longest candles I can go with.
So anyway, you might have heard that we're talking about Shame, but initially we were talking about being the first indie that I wanted to recommend from 2011. We sort of go in preferential order for each of us, like my favorites and then one of their guys' favorites. We talked about doing the film 50-50 with Seth Rogen and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. We sort of decided that the very presence of those two guys in that film, even though it was technically an indie, nominated for a bunch of Spirit Awards, was maybe not indie enough for our indie spotlight. It was probably had too much of a presence to really count. So for those of you that follow us on Facebook, the trivia question for this episode that we were teasing was that there was the filmmaker who directed this week's indie directed a film that won Best Picture recently. And of course, that is 2013's 12 Years a Slave. And this film tonight, Shame, is the film he made right before 12 Years a Slave. And maybe we'll dip into a little talk about that film as well. So we went right from this film to 12 Years a Slave. So anyway, that is that. Are you guys excited to talk about this movie right now?
I am.
Yeah, excited to get into it.
So to speak.
So to speak. Yep.
This is gonna be bad.
This has the potential to go very south very fast. So anyway, but that was also stalling so I can get this picture up. This is Brendan, as played by Michael Fassbender. He is a single, successful New York yuppie who is forced to confront his sex addiction when his attractive younger sister comes for a surprise visit. So this is a movie that I'm recommending, for discussion for the rest of the group. It's my indie spotlight, if you will. And this is the kind of movie that I would make, or I aspire to make, in the sense that it's naturalistic, character-driven. It challenges, mores, if you will. I think it's effective. I think it's powerful without being overly flashy. I think that each directorial choice that Steve McQueen makes is motivated and captures the moments perfectly, or very eloquently anyway, which is something that it's a balance of things that I feel like his film prior called Hunger is almost too artsy for its own good. Like, he'll hold on shots for way too long, and I like long takes, but they need to be motivated by something. And in Hunger, sometimes they were just for the sake of doing long shots. Where 12 Years a Slave was almost too safe, and it was too much focused on story without any sort of the style that he expressed here in a movie like Shame. So Shame actually puts together the two almost perfectly, and I'm curious to see what he does next. Also, the other reason I want to recommend it is I think the performances are amazing, and for Michael Fassbender and Carey Mulligan, two of our best, I think it's for each of them the best performance of each of their respective careers. I'm foaming at the mouth. I'm so excited, everybody. Who goes first? J Money, you are first. Your thoughts, sir?
Well, I clearly liked it as well. I thought it was a very enjoyably and meaty film for a wide variety of reasons. I think that you're absolutely right in terms of how honed it feels. It was a very tight film. Again, no pun intended. It just felt like it was a very efficient use of absolutely everything that makes a special film, and I really appreciated that. I really appreciated
We
how.
like this film a lot, but we're going to be making jokes like that all night. Again, it's an NC-17 film, everybody.
I appreciate how
I'm
how
trying
put
to
together
avoid
it
it.
was.
I'm also trying to keep my voice down. No one's home here, but I got in trouble last time I was here for being too loud. So I feel like I don't have enough energy, but that's beside the point. Davy Joe, your opening thoughts.
I can't believe he's meaty, huh? Anyway.
You know what I'm talking about, son.
Anyway.
Davey,
no, it's a fantastic film. I loved it, and I was noticing a lot of the directorial decisions. You know,
well, go ahead.
Just to get these kinds of performances out of actors. I mean, I know they're great actors to begin with, but just there were times when he would just let the camera sit and just let them go and not distract me with changing the shot and the way he held things. That shot right there. That is.
What did I tell you before we started to not reference photos before?
Oh, well, yeah, you did specifically say not to do that. Show that picture, because it's perfect. That is exactly what I was talking about.
But yes, that's where I wanted to go. That was where I wanted to go first. And I mean, like, you went from performances to this. I think this is direction. I think this is very competent direction. I think this is direction, the kind of direction that actors like, especially theater-trained actors, because I think that it allows them to play in the space. But in this particular case, not as much, because they were the shot was sort of tight. Like, as you can see, they sort of like take up the whole frame. So they didn't actually have as much, like where in the 40s and 30s when they had, like they had long takes that were wider. They didn't actually have a lot of freedom of movement. So like that is a testament to the performances and the way they worked within Steve McQueen's frame. But I mean, like, unlike Hunger, which Hunger has at one point a 20-minute long dialogue scene, like in 20 minutes. Have you guys seen Hunger?
No.
And it's a two-person scene sitting across from a table, and it's just a shot of the table and the two of them talking for 20 minutes. And it's interesting, but it's way too long. Whereas this is perfect. It feels perfect, and you don't want him to move. And the other thing I thought was great about the film is I feel like the shots only move when necessary. And I'm thinking about, do you guys remember the running scene?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
A dialogueless, a scene without dialogue. I mean, like, beautifully done, beautifully choreographed, and like something that a lot of mainstream filmmakers wouldn't dare to try.
Yeah. No, it was fascinating to watch. It was a wonderful take. It was also an example of a long take that was really effective, even though there was very little that was necessarily changing about it, and yet it felt like it was speaking volumes at the same time.
Well, I mean, like, we often talk about tone and mood as being like the director's secret challenge, and I mean, I feel like that the boldness of that, makes it work perfectly. The other thing that Steve McQueen likes to play around with is temporal relations. What do you guys like? How did you guys feel about how in terms of a narrative structure, how the time worked, the time within the diegesis? Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
What do you? Actually,
I mean, like, the way that he sort of like shuffled the order of things happening. Like, I don't know if you remember the time where he walks around and plays that message from his sister. Like,
okay, sure. Yeah.
Back to that a few times. Yeah. There's a montage in the end. Like, one point we see him with a cut on his face, and
right.
We're like, where did he get that? And then it plays around with that. And I think he does that in a very fluid way in this film. Whereas he tries that in Hunger and 12 Years a Slave, both of which not as successfully as he does it here, because it's a bold thing to try to play around with the relationship of time like that. You run the risk of confusing your audience. But in this case, I think it works really nicely. So that's what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I noticed it in the first couple of scenes, like you're talking about, where they show him walking around and we're hearing messages. And then it's funny because by the time it moved to the sort of the last act where you're referring to the cut in his face, I at that point understood what was going to happen. I understood that he was now setting up this process. So in that sense, I was excited to see where it was going to go, because it was almost like, I'm familiar with what you're doing. I'm familiar with your bag of tricks here. So I love the fact that you're.
Well, yeah, he's established. I think that's great filmmaking too. You establish your style.
Yeah.
And then you're free to use it as you need it.
Yeah, absolutely.
David, do you have anything?
Well, I mean, I think as far as the timing, that definitely was just an interesting twist and a flourish that I enjoyed. But there's a scene that I specifically wanted to ask you about. When he goes on the date with his coworker, and they're walking down the street, and they're kind of going out of the dark and into the light, and out of the dark and into the light, and it looked. I mean, it's just kind of like the way it would look if you were actually there, and I feel like a lot of filmmakers would not have. I think they would have played with the light. I don't think they would have let it get so dark and then light and then dark again. I don't know. Did that stick out to you at all, or?
Well, I mean, I see a lot of indie films, and it's common in indie films, and I would say it's more common in indie films because lack of resources than actual choice. But I would argue that in this film, it probably was a choice. And yeah, I find it frequently more effective, and it's definitely how I would shoot it, and I have done so even before seeing Shame. If you look at the web series that we shot called Intersection, like that's sort of how we handled things, because any sort of manipulation beyond that feels like the director's hand, affecting things. It takes you out, I think, a little bit.
Absolutely.
I can't believe, I don't know if it was live or with someone else that I've talked about lens splatter, how I always hate lens splatter, and some of the best do it, like P.T. Anderson does it sometimes, and I saw it recently, and I can't remember if we talked about it on the show or not, but lens splatter always takes me out. I think maybe The Revenant does it at one point, but because it reminds you that there's a lens, and I feel like that's a big faux pas, and it's not cool, and not hip, and that's something a naturalistic film like this would never even dream about. So the one directorial thing that I did take issue with, and it's only one scene, and I actually have a picture of it. He runs basically to a mark in this spot, about very close to the end of this movie. I don't know if you remember, and then he has like a moment, and it just feels a little like it's the only time that I really felt like he really manipulated the action for an image. You know what I mean? And so it felt out of place. Like Fassbender does a great job in the scene from a performance point of view, but I mean, like it really feels like he has to stop in this perfectly marked spot, and it's just like that is the one moment that feels contrived to me. I don't know if you guys noticed that.
Yeah, I think that I felt a little overwrought. I actually would have preferred them to cut it like about 10 minutes before that, in the scene where he finds his sister, without really having revealed any kind of resolution post that.
Oh, really? You wouldn't want to know that how things worked out?
No, I think, I mean, I don't have a problem knowing, but I also think that I would have been completely fine, and I kind of expected it to happen at that point as well, so that's why I'm saying this. I think it would have been maybe a stronger ending for me than what you're describing, which did, seem like almost a self-aware way of ending the story. It's sort of a self-aware way of describing this character's pain in a way that we hadn't seen before.
I was going to move on to performances, but I mean, we have about 6 minutes left, so there was a couple things I wanted that we could talk about. I don't know if we're going to get to everything, so let me give you guys a choice here.
Okay.
We can talk about the performances a little more detail. We can talk about sexuality, or we can talk about the film's relationship to New York City, which are three things that I thought were interesting about it. What do you guys think? What's your preference? Quickly.
Well, I definitely have a few things to say about the film's relationship to New York City on a personal level.
Great. Take it away.
There's a lot of things to say about the performances, though, as well. So it's kind of...
Well, Davey, do you want to break his tie?
New York, New York, New York. Let's do New York.
There it is. J Money, New York.
All right. I just want to say it's interesting because I work around a lot of the areas that they shot around. There's a lot of scenes that take place on the West Side that take place in a very now infamous hotel called the Standard, and the scene where Carey Mulligan, I think, is singing, for instance, is in the Boom Boom Room, which is the club at the Standard. There's a love affair with New York in this movie that's fantastic to watch. It really is about the spaces and the dehumanized spaces that he seems to sort of live within that help make his character seem claustrophobic in a way, but also seem, look at it seems like a survivor. There's a quality to this that's not romanticized to me, which I really appreciate.
Well, I also feel like it makes him feel like not as much of a freak.
Yeah,
like he almost he's gonna fit anywhere. It's in New York City.
Yeah, it's funny. Also, there's the bunch of scenes that happen in the third act where he is after he has kind of a nervous breakdown and he goes on sort of a bender of sex. Ultimately, there's a bunch of scenes where you see him trying to get into a club and then getting into a club. Mm-hmm. All those scenes happened on the block I work on, so it was really funny to see what they did and how they changed it. The first scene where he's going into a club and he gets denied, that was actually the doorway to an open-air metal yard, a scrap yard. So they just tried to convert it. And then the club he went to after that, called Quo, which actually was a real club called Quo, was literally across the street from that. So that's all gone now. All that's been torn down and replaced by condos.
Because of
the thing is, the one thing that's still in that street that was there when they were shooting that is Scores, the strip club. They managed to completely avoid showing Scores or even considering using Scores.
I mean, Scores is not. Scores is not his scene though.
It's too ritzy. It's too much for this. So it was really interesting to see how they kind of managed to avoid that and turn everything else into this crazy den of sex.
I will say, I do think that the film's relationship with New York is really important. This is one of those films that that embraces the city. That I really appreciate. The city as a character, and I really like that about it. Although I do, this always bugs me as a New Yorker. That, and it happens a lot, that subways are taken for granted. Like,
yeah, it didn't make any sense in terms of what they're doing.
At Fulton Street or something.
Yeah,
and then there's the L that came at one point. And like Steve McQueen's a British guy. I don't know if he cared or what happened, but like, it's fine. I mean, like I noticed it, and it seemed like they cut around it as much as they could, but it could have been done a little better. Davey, what about you chose this, New York, New York. What do you got?
The thing that struck me is there's a scene where his sister is like yelling at him. She's like, wow, you have a job and an apartment. You're so special. And that's something that I think a lot of people who don't live in New York don't get. It's like, yeah, that is kind of amazing. Like, it's like a big deal if you can do that.
Well, but that's not what is the point of what she's saying, though. At the same time,
well, but it kind of informs where he's coming from with that. Like he's like kind of impressed with himself. That is sort of him holding his status, like him feeling like he has this particular status. I think, and I think that she's the out of towner and doesn't quite get that.
Yeah. So what do you guys feel about? So this is the topic that I was waiting on, and we can go back to performances if you really want. But I wanted to talk about how the film utilized ambiguity as a storytelling tool. And J Money touched on it a little bit, so maybe you want to talk about it a little more.
What did I touch on before? I'm blanking.
Well, you talked about you actually mentioned the lack of ambiguity in one scene. Like you wish that there was more ambiguity in terms of the resolution with the sister character, but I do think there's a lot of usage of ambiguity overall, in terms of how the film tells its story.
In terms of his relationship with people around him and his sister, perhaps, is that what you mean, or are you talking about?
Yeah, well, the ambiguity, like certainly the sexual tension between them is an example of usage of ambiguity. Would you disagree with that?
No, I think that was definitely intentional, and I thought that was really one of the most fascinating things about it. I think the fact that they left a lot of the question of like the origin story almost of their pain up for grabs made it in a lot of ways much more humanizing way to handle the characters.
I mean, at one point she leaves a message that says we aren't bad people. We come from a bad place.
Right,
really?
Right. You can tell that they come from a very fractured situation, and you can tell that ultimately they're trying to deal with it in their own terms. And that's but they don't really ever define that. And I think that actually helps you kind of...
Well, I mean, I think that's two ambiguities, like where they come from and also their relationship with each other. I think they're tied together, but they're also separate things. And also, like, what happens, is he going to change his ways at the end, like things like that. Right. I think there's a lot left to the imagination in a very powerful way.
But I think it also really helps to not make him. I mean, ultimately, both these characters are doing things that otherwise you would, maybe a less subtle hand, find incredibly detestable. Like they're both, on the surface, very detestable kind of characters, but they don't ever end up being portrayed that way.
Would you actually say detestable? Like actually detestable?
Well, I think that their activity could be considered detestable. I mean, certainly the way that he reacts to the world around him is relatively detestable. But I never felt.
Well, I mean, there's an issue there with self-loathing, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's what I'm saying. Like, it's amazing to me. It's fantastic that they were managed to let his pain kind of show through in a way that made him much more human, even though they never really bothered to literally say this is why. They never gave him an excuse. They never gave him an excuse to be the way he was, and yet at the same time he felt so incredibly human, because of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that was my next question. Maybe you just answered it. Is like you say they're detestable, but I mean, like I don't say I empathize, but I mean, like I certainly.
You wish.
Sympathize.
Yeah, I mean, I sympathize. Well, I mean, like I empathize in the sense, like, I certainly can get behind some of the emotions that lead him to, like, it maybe doesn't manifest itself in the same way with me, but certainly it does for J Money. And so, in that sense, I mean, did you feel for this guy? Like, I mean, like you called him detestable, but at the same time, like, I rooted for him. I felt for him. I felt his pain. Like, certainly in that scene in the car where his sister's, in the taxi, with his sister's making out with another guy. I mean,
JP, what I'm actually saying is, even though he is shown doing a lot of detestable things, the way that he's presented as a character makes you root for him, makes you like him.
Okay.
Like, it's amazing how much he is humanized because of everything else that's happening around him.
Davey, do you agree?
No, I completely agree, and the fact that he does these things that he neglects his sister and it almost kills her. So you could really easily hate him, but you don't.
Well, I mean, she hurt him too. So his neglect comes from a place of vindictive, a natural place of vindictiveness.
But
I'm not justifying it so much as.
But
she's also very needy. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so I mean, like I've certainly been in that place where I'm, like I get those phone calls. I'm like, again, I've got to deal. Like I'm not. I just need a break from that. Like I felt those feelings. I don't think he was trying to hurt her or neglect her. I just think he was just not the place for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we have to go. Lots of good stuff. If you want more, J Money will deliver it on the NNCS Leftovers on Twitter. Hashtag NNCS Leftovers. You can ask some questions there. I probably won't participate, but that's beside the point.
Maybe you're always welcome to, even if you don't agree with anything I say, you're always welcome to participate.
I know, but I kind of don't.
It's better if you disagree.
I think it's a slippery slope, and I think I should stay out of it.
Right.
It's easier to talk to you than it is to, like, argue in 180 characters or whatever it is.
Well, strangers are welcome to say anything, so.
Oh, I know I am, and I do. Interesting enough, next time, the indie we're going to do next time, February 8th, 8:30 p.m., 5:30 Pacific, was also from a director who directed a film that won Best Picture, except the director of this particular film also won Best Director, and but not in the last 30 years. This is a guy that won an Oscar more than 30 years ago, did an indie 5 years ago. That's next week's indie, so that's your little trivia tease. So find out what that is on Facebook and so forth. And next up is Classic Movie of the Week, our tour de force, the part everybody likes, our Classic Movie of the Week, my favorite segment, and we're going musicals. We got Oklahoma from 1955. That's our Classic Movie of the Week. That's coming up next. And later tonight, don't forget the Sound Off. Davey's got a diatribe, and I'm going to do my top 5 alien invasion movies based on the our discussion of the Fifth Wave. Okay, that's the pitch. Oklahoma's coming up next. We'll see you in about 3 minutes or so.